Greetings and welcome to Unit 7. I'm glad you're here. We have a lot to cover today, so let's dive right in. First, let's talk just a little bit about the assignments that will be coming up for this unit. We have the readings for the Allison and Kay book, chapters 4 and 5. Readings for the graduate level students include the Powell and Bromley chapters 12 and 15. And then for assignments, you have the industry expert interview, which is your midterm project. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment here at the beginning of this video. You also have a group project memo due. So this is your first memo, and it's really simple. In 50 to 100 words, you need to identify the organization that you and your group will be talking about for your project. And all you need to do is identify what this organization is. It can be a nonprofit uh, anywhere in the sector. It can be a local nonprofit. It can be a larger nonprofit. The key is you want to be able to have a lot of information about this organization because you're going to be doing a lot of work on them with this first project on your SWOT analysis and your grant writing project. So the big thing you need to do is to do your due diligence and homework to make sure that you can find things like financial records online. Maybe annual reports would be fantastic if they have some of those available. Other kind of documents that give a clear picture of the organization so that you can draw on those in your assignment. Okay, so this memo just simply and clearly lay out what organization you're going to be looking at, and you'll see some more details here in the unit as we go along. And I'll be releasing some more instructions in another video on this big project that's coming up, the first part of it. Okay. Also, watch the instructor lecture, which you're doing now. Watch the group presentation, discussion board posts for Unit 7, and the quiz. All right. As always, please keep reaching out as we're going along. We're getting close to the midpoint of this class by this point, by Unit 7. And so if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out to me. Always happy to hear from you. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about your industry expert interview. And I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see the rubric, which is also posted online. So you'll be able to see that just fine yourself. But it's helpful sometimes to go through this together. Okay, your industry expert interview, and there is not a presentation component of that. You may have seen some pieces that kind of hint at that, but because this class is asynchronous and online, it is just simply the written component. Of course, you're welcome to talk about your interview and some of the process in our discussion boards if you'd like. I'm happy for you to use that assignment to talk about the process a little bit. I'd always love to hear it, but it's not required by any means. Okay, so what is the industry expert interview and how do you go about this? So for this assignment, you're going to interview an executive level nonprofit leader regarding specific topics from the course and how they relate to the leader's real world experience. Based on that information that you obtained through your research and the interview, you're going to write a short reflection essay, about 3 to 5 pages. There is an additional requirement for graduate level students. Graduate level students will also include 2 to 3 additional pages reflecting on identifying and describing 3 to 5 concepts from the readings they've been doing in the Powell book, Nonprofit Sector, a Research Handbook. This is meant to be a place where graduate students can talk about this additional reading they've been doing and can give an insight into how that's impacting them and how they're thinking about it. All right, so instructions here for this interview. First, you're going to select a leader from an established nonprofit organization who you're going to interview, right? You can select someone from any kind of section of our sector, but the big key is they need to be in the nonprofit industry, right? So it could be a large nonprofit like the Pittsburgh Foundation. It could be a university like Duquesne. It could be a small animal shelter or food bank. It could be a church. Any kind of nonprofit is just fine, but you should choose something that interests you, right? And that some part of the industry that you're passionate about and want to learn more about. That will make this assignment much easier and much more doable. So reach out to them as soon as possible. Often, nonprofit leaders are not able to schedule something the day before, right? So I'd encourage you to reach out as soon as possible. Um, and if you have any issues with finding a nonprofit leader, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to connect you with someone if needed, or to help you kind of think through um, and what that could look like. But the big key again is that they're in the nonprofit sector. And then two, they need to be someone who is in a leadership role of some kind. This could be a director, an executive director, a CEO, a chair of a department. It should be someone who is making the kinds of decisions we're talking about in this course on a daily basis, right? There and they could also be over a specific unit in an organization, like a director of marketing and communications, a director of programming. Anyone who has ownership like that of an organization at kind of a strategic or leadership level. Then let's look at this next step here. Step two is you're going to create a list of interview questions beforehand. The list of your questions should be informed by your research of the executive's organization. Research is vital. So if you have trouble thinking of the kind of questions you want to ask, please reach out to me. I'm happy to brainstorm with you. You should be aiming for 25 to 30, 35 questions. You won't use all of these in the interview, but they will give you enough to be prepared for the interview and to be able to draw on as you do the interview. I suggest a mixture of questions that range from general questions, how did they get started in the industry? What was their education like? To specific questions about things that you're interested in. Things like how do you handle a crisis in an organization? If I was doing the interview, I might ask how they tell the story of their organization and what really excites them and what they're passionate about with the story of their organization. In the interview, you're going to obtain general information like we talked about, but the bulk should be focused on those questions of things that interest you and that relate back to the course. Getting advice from leaders can be really wonderful, and I've had moments where I've been surprised at how meaningful that advice can be. After conducting the interview, of course, thank them. Make sure that you're treating the leader's time respectfully. That's a big thing, and afterwards, you're going to write this report, this essay, and then you're going to kind of make connections to what we've been learning in class in that report. So you'll see the step-by-step kind of grading rubric, which will give you an idea of what I'm looking for in the essay. So demonstrating a thoughtful set of researched questions, right? Your research should include going and looking at the person's bio, understanding what their background is. All of that is really important, and it should be reflected here in your essay. The report makes clear connection between the material obtained in the interview and course content. Then the report pulls together interview material and course content to make applications to the interests that you have in the field of nonprofit development and philanthropy. And then finally, it should be formatted correctly and look professional, free of mistakes, grammar mistakes, and formatting errors. You see the total possible points. And then in the grading rubric for graduate students, it's all the same except for that additional requirement for the additional reflection piece on the Powell and Bromley book. All right. Reach out, please, if you have questions. But that is the gist of what we're doing here for the this assignment. And I'm always happy again to collaborate with you if you have any questions on the interview itself or in helping set that up. Okay, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the readings for this week. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to share my screen again because I would like to talk a little bit about the chapters themselves that we have been reading together. Um, and I think we can do that here. Let's see. Yeah, I've got this. I'm sharing this with you now. Okay, chapter four and chapter five. And I'm not going to cover all the details in this chapter because I want to save something for the presenting groups. But I do really want to cover a couple of things here, especially the ways that they, the authors make this information practical. And they do a little bit of some uh, examples throughout these chapters that I'd love to pull apart together and talk about in more detail. So, chapter four is all about this environmental scan, which is step four in their overarching kind of plan for moving forward. We're talking about the environmental scan and the theory of change and program portfolio today in chapters four and five. Excuse me. Um, and this is a really important chapter to be reading and to be looking at. So, having this view of what an environmental scan is really important. I don't know if you have ever been in a situation where you have needed to do an environmental scan that's not related to strategic leadership, but is just about your actual lived-in environment. Maybe this was something that I can think of two places where I often know people that have gotten used to conducting environmental scans. One is for people who are used to being outdoors a lot and hiking. So I grew up in Central Oregon, which has a lot of outdoors kind of things in a rural environment. And I grew up from a really early age hiking in the wilderness and kind of being in nature a lot. And one of the things you learn as you're hiking and as you're involved kind of in the outdoors is that you want to be aware of the world around you. And you are kind of keeping an eye out for danger that might happen, right? If there's wild animals or if maybe there's a path that has some erosion or just yeah, not fearful, but kind of keeping an expanded consciousness is a little bit of what it is. It's like, oh, hey, I'm aware of the sights and smells around me. I'm taking in my environment. That's one area I've met people. I've also met people who grew up kind of in a more of a city environment, who also have that sense of environmental awareness, where they're aware of the person that's over here. You're aware of the cars that are there. You're kind of keeping to your own thing that you're doing. This was very foreign to my experience. I grew up in a very small town, and when I visited big cities for the first time, I I wasn't sure why people weren't just kind of waving to each other and being really friendly. And I was a disaster going into big cities for the first time. But there's a certain environmental awareness that someone who's grown up in that environment cultivates, right? Where you're aware of potential threats, potential opportunities, like a lot of the things we're talking about here. Um, you're cultivating an awareness of your environment that helps keep you safe and that helps you to continue to move forward, right, with whatever you're doing. And in a lot of ways, what we're talking about here from an organizational perspective has some similarities. It's about having an expansive view of how your organization is situated in its context, right? So instead of a view of how you're situated in nature or in the city, how is your organization situated in its context? And cultivate an awareness of that. And that's important as a leader to understand that about your organization, to be able to use that understanding to make decisions. Right? You're going to see some helpful details here in your reading about scenario planning. Um, there's a two by two matrix, which is helpful, looking at competition, looking at funding, and then organizing your research, summarizing your findings about the environment and in your environmental scan. This is an important note here of sometimes it can be difficult to justify why you're putting all the work into an environmental scan in the midst of the hundred things that you have going and that you're doing as an organizational leader. But it's incredibly important, and it's something that will benefit your organization in the long term, and it will lead to good outcomes. But you have to invest the time and the energy into this. All right. So this is a sample worksheet, and this is what I wanted to cover with you in some more detail here. This is a case study involving the organization County Legal Aid Society. And we're going to look a little bit about at the questions that they conducted in this environmental scan. And I think this will give you a better idea of what an environmental scan is as we continue to engage with your colleagues' presentation and with the chapter reading material. Okay. So first, you'll notice here is they're operating in terms of summarizing the external forces, opportunities, and threats that might have influence on our organization. Right? They're using some language from a SWOT analysis. Right? Opportunities, threats. And you're going to see first is a summary of the external environment. So there's this theory of change and program portfolio. And the question is, what are the 3 to 5 primary forces in your organization's environment? They include political, economic, social values, demographics, legal, technological, the built and natural environment that are either supporting or being able to better achieve our mission. This is especially focused on external opportunities or forces that are working against our being able to better achieve our mission. These are external threats. What are the implications of these trends in the environment for our organization? Right. So it's back to that situational awareness. And you'll see here that the organization, again, this is the County Legal Society, and they identify shifting demographics and increased poverty, right? This is one of those pieces here. This is a force in the external environment that's taking place. There's an economic shift in firms and in law schools. And then there's also technology, right? And these are advances that are happening. So these are some things that could be taking place and that could be contributing to different factors for the organization. If we were doing this kind of assignment, this situational analysis for somewhere like Duquesne, there would be some things that we could pick out of that, right? So if we're looking at the external factors that influence Duquesne right now, you can look at declining undergrad enrollment throughout the country, right? This is often referred to in admission circles as the demographic cliff, and it's a combination of people having less kids and less people being interested in going to college. And a lot of undergrad teaching institutions are struggling to attract students and retain students in this environment. And so that's a force that Duquesne has to grapple with as they're doing their work and as they're fulfilling their mission, right? So you start to see looking at these external forces, what are taking place right now with funding. So a lot of funding has been rescinded from research institutions by the U.S. federal government. They're making changes to their policies about funding, and so especially a lot of health funding, and these are often really big grants in the multiple millions of dollars. They're being retracted or cut short, and that's an external factor that's influencing universities right now, and that has to be taken into account, right? Okay, another question would be, what are the major trends and developments in our field of service that we need to consider when setting priorities for our future, right? So things like development in the law, they mentioned here, mergers of other legal aid organizations. So this is focused less on the large scale environment. It's more in our specific sector, our specific field of service, right? And that might be something that where you put the Duquesne example in this bucket, but it can also be in a larger bucket if it kind of depends on the organization you're looking at. Some other things that could be specific here would be, for example, if you're working with maybe a music festival. I had a student in this class a few years ago who did some incredible work with a local music festival that brought in these bands and artists, and maybe something that the industry especially is facing is the rising cost of gasoline. And so your artists are having a harder time getting to your festival, you have to either pay them more or find ways to help support them. There are all kinds of industry specific questions. The next big question they have here is what are our major competitors? Who are our major competitors? Excuse me, and what distinguishes us from our competition? Has the competitive environment changed? And if yes, how has it changed? And what are the implications for how we respond to competition in the future, right? So this is something that at the university level, universities are really good at identifying their competitors. And sometimes it can be as simple as going through and seeing who their big rivals are in sports. And sometimes those really are their competitors in terms of competing for admissions and for students and for talent. Um, but it's helpful to have these benchmarks. When you have environmental awareness, you're understanding what other competitors are doing in the field. And that doesn't mean that competition is always cutthroat or kind of a zero-sum game, right? There are lots of times where you may be competing, you may be cooperating really closely with some of your competitors, depending on the industry, right? We've talked about this idea of collaborative network sort of approach to nonprofit leadership, and that is really true, and I want you to hold on to that. But also, there's this reality that there is some competition in some of these fields. And so having an awareness of your competitors, their capacity, their strengths, and their weaknesses can help you as you're planning for your organization. Business model. What are the general trends of funding from foundations, individuals, online giving that will have an impact on our current business model? And again, you'll notice that there are some of these factors that can overlap with each other pretty easily. But this is really meant to focus strongly on how is your organization making money and what are the factors that influence those income streams, right? So if you're noticing if you're running a small local nonprofit and you're noticing that your grassroots funding is decreasing over the last 2 years, you're getting less monthly donations. The big question is why? What's happening? Is this a larger trend because of the economy? Is this something that your donors are not feeling as engaged in? Like what kinds of things are impacting your business model in terms of funding? It could also be, I really appreciate that they mentioned granting organizations, and maybe something has shifted or changed. I've been involved with a nonprofit organization that had secured some really reliable funding from a large nonprofit granting organization. And there was a good relationship. The nonprofit really relied on this funding, but then priorities at the granting institution changed. There was a change in leadership. There was a shift in priorities, and they found themselves really kind of caught unaware about this because this was a significant part of their budget. I think up to like a quarter, maybe. It was a large amount, and it was something they had relied on really reliably, and it was gone pretty quickly. And that's something to be prepared for and to be able to understand what these trends are that might influence your income streams. What are the general economic factors that have affected or may impact your organization's ability to support programs in the future? And this, I think, gets really strongly at organizations that have endowments. So, if your organization relies heavily on its endowment, which is this large sum of money that's usually invested in the stock market and has returns, and often those returns are used in operating budgets. And so, if your organization is reliant on that kind of model on the stock market for its operating budget, then if the stock market is doing poorly, that could impact the amount of money that you have for programming and for day-to-day operations. Then are there innovative examples of business models that might be relevant for us to consider during the planning process? And this is where you can be creative, right? You can look at what other people are doing and say, oh, this seems like it could have some promise for what we're trying to do. Organizational capacity is another category here of questions in the environmental scan. So, questions like, are there trends in human resources, including compensation policy, staff retention, that we should pay attention to during our planning discussion? An organization that I was a part of in the past did a survey of all of their employees' positions. So they didn't reach out directly to the employees, but what they did was they looked at every position in the organization and they compared it to national averages in terms of compensation, direct compensation, benefits, uh, indirect benefits, kind of the whole package. And they had these benchmarks of what the industry kind of standards were for their region, for their industry. And they compared what they were compensating employees with these benchmarks. And they found in that process that they were under the average on multiple positions. And so they rolled out this big plan for bringing their pay scales and their benefits and things up to par with where they want it to be. And that takes a lot of work, but it also is really important. You can't do that unless you're aware of where the industry is and how it compares with other organizations, how your organization compares with other organizations. Next question is, are there relevant developments in technology, management information systems, planning and evaluation that we should factor in when agreeing on structures and systems priorities that support our organizational capacity to sustain quality services and, if needed, growth? Whew, that's a mouthful. But the big idea is, are there these systems that can help us do what we're doing better? Right now, and I think I might have mentioned this at some point, but I'm involved in trying to bring online a project management system for our organization. I'm looking at a solution called Asana, and they do like project management, especially for creative organizations that are doing creative projects, but also they help with long-term planning and strategizing. And the hope is that this program, this software, this app will help us to better track what we're wanting to accomplish and giving steps for us to do that in the future collaboratively across teams, across departments in our university. There are other people in our university already using this, other units using this, and it could help us do what we're doing better. But it requires an investment in time and learning and in onboarding onto that system. So there are things like that that can really make a big impact in our organization's capacity. This is the leadership section of questions here. So, what about your senior leadership team and governance, right? So, questions like, what trends in the field, such as executive transition management, leadership development programs, will influence sustaining a leaderful organization? So, as you're doing your environmental scan, looking at how other organizations handle leadership is really important. And this is specifically focused on like the staff end of things. Does your organization have in place policies for finding the right leaders, right? You'll notice that some organizations have policies, especially around their leadership team, to conduct national searches. And those are more expensive. They take more time, more effort. You're usually trying to gather people from all over the country. You're expecting often that they will move to wherever your location is. You're not just recruiting locally, you're trying to get the best talent. And that takes money and investment. And what positions warrant that for your organization? I've been a part of organizations that don't conduct national searches for any of their positions. I've been a part of organizations that will conduct them for senior leadership, right? And then I've been a part of interview processes for organizations that conduct national searches for every single position they have, and that's a lot, right? And so there's a lot of different ways of doing this, but the key is, how do you um, build this core leadership team that you need for your organization to succeed and to thrive? And how are other organizations doing that? right? Especially competitors, people who are leaders in your field that you want to emulate. What are they doing and what seems to be working? Then also what trends are happening regarding board governance that we should look at in terms of um, are there term limits? Are there long-term board priorities? Um, Bunch of different questions, right? How is your board structured? Is your board really hands-on and involved in the organization, volunteering, helping make decisions, or are they kind of more in an advisory capacity? And what kind of expectations do other organizations have of board members, right? Um, this would be a really interesting set of questions when you look at what kinds. So one of the things about boards is that there is often a expectation that if you are serving on a board, you're contributing to the organization. And when I was in my mid 20s, I was first asked to be a part of a board. And I didn't understand that concept that when you're a part of a nonprofit board, you're often expected to make a minimum contribution. And it's even when you get into it, it'll be explicitly stated, and they will come and ask you for that specific dollar figure. And I was broke in my mid 20s, and I wanted to help. And uh, people were very generous in helping me understand that there was a certain amount of obligation that comes with being on a board. And I gave what I could, and then I also did a lot of volunteer work and a lot of involvement in the organization, and it was just fine. But this is something that it's helpful to know what other organizations expect and require from their board members. Is the expectation in kind of the industry that board members give $10,000 a year? Is it $100,000 a year? What kinds of are there term limits on board seats? Do boards set long-term goals for what they want to accomplish? All of that is helpful to be aware of in the larger sector that you're operating. Okay, and then highest priority issues from environmental scan. Looking at all these things that you've done an environmental scan. What stands out? What comes to the surface? What are the kinds of things to be aware of? And how do you incorporate those things into what you're doing, right? So this is the chapter. I find this to be really helpful to kind of look at and talk about in some more detail. Um, let's move over to chapter five. And I want to highlight a couple of things in chapter five. So the big piece here in chapter five is your strategic planning. So this was your grant writing and strategic plan exercise, which you'll see the assignment here in just a little bit. But this piece here, the strategic planning for chapter five, I wanted to really hone in on one particular piece of this chapter. But you're going to see here theory of change, program portfolio. This is really helpful stuff around assessing and looking at your specific organization. So after you've done an environmental scan, you're taking that information and you're looking specifically at what your organization does and what it does well, where it needs to improve, right? So instead of just looking at the external environment, you're looking internally and you're asking, how can we do better, right? So you're doing things like assessing the needs of the organization, right? You're identifying the nature and dimensions of the problems that you're working to solve. You're assessing your program portfolio. How effective is it in solving those needs that you've identified? A competitive analysis. How well are you doing in relation to others? So this goes beyond what you did before. It's not just about what other organizations are doing. It's about how you compare to them with what you're doing. And then defining your current and future theory of change. What has been your overarching program strategy? And how can you increase its impact? What can you do to change that trajectory? Right? Excuse me. So I want to go down a little bit here to talk specifically about the SWOT analysis. So this is helpful, and it's some of what you're going to be doing here with this upcoming group assignment. It's not due soon, but you should be thinking about it soon, right? So this is our SWOT analysis. So they have some thought here about uh, there's a whole kind of piece about the children's theater program. And in the strategic planning process, you'll see this organization, City Theater Company, was making some important strategic decisions, and they were using a really simple kind of environmental scanning planning tool, a SWOT analysis, right? You probably heard of this before if you've been in management circles or business circles, but a SWOT analysis simply stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so, as you're doing your theory of change, as you're doing this analysis of your organization, this is a simple and helpful tool um, to be able to look at that, right? So, um, first, strengths. What are the strengths of the organization? In this case, you'll see they've identified the strengths of this theater group, right? What is it that your organization is doing well? Weaknesses. What kinds of places um, does your organization need to grow in? Where are you feeling some of the pains and what could be some places for growth? So opportunities, these are external. So both strengths and weaknesses are internal to the organization, and opportunities and threats focus on the external environment. So what kind of opportunities might there be um, in what you're doing? Could there be a grant that's on the horizon that you could apply for? Could there be a partnership with another organization to create synergy? There's a lot of things that might be on the horizon. What are they? Can you lay them out? Threats. Similarly, in the external environment, what kind of things might be threatening the organization or pushing at it from the outside? Things like drying up funding opportunities, changing demographics in the population that you serve. All kinds of questions can emerge here. Um, Laying each of these out, your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, helps as you're doing your SWOT analysis to understand the organization and what is needed for future growth, and can make up a core part of a strategy for a strategic plan. Hmm. All right. That brings us to the end of our discussion for today. Thank you so much for your time. If you have questions, please reach out either on this chapter or on other kinds of questions. I'm happy to talk with you a little bit more. But thank you so much for your time and all the best to you as you're studying. Take care.